Hello fellow Minecrafters, this is me, John, and I love spruce tree farms. As you know, my first ever official video on this channel was a spruce tree farm, but what you do not know, my first ever redstone design and farming were 2x2 spruce tree farms. Big spruces are the trees that are perfect for farming without being such a pain. And I love the huge log to bone meal ratio. It was hugely satisfying when I completed one, like the one behind me. Now how I got this new design was two factors. One was the new 100% TNT drop rate. As you know, the recent versions of Bedrock Edition finally have 100% TNT drops, and I want to implement that into my farm. This is so that we no longer need wither cages. First, I just wanted to put an add-on to my spruce farm, though that became challenging. That is due to the fact that I did not build this tree farm with TNT in mind, so the infrastructure for such a system is not there. Similar to adding new hardware to my old hardware, you need specific things to run the new stuff properly. If I want this farm to work, I need to build another tree farm with TNT chambers in mind. Now this is easier said than done, because making a tree farm faster than my old design is going to be hard. But then I had an epiphany. While I was cleaning dishes, I was recalling some of my old redstone doors I built based on others to gain more knowledge on how redstone worked in Bedrock Edition. One of them was from Ben the Human. His piston door, the 4x4 glass iris door, specifically for its closing sequence. It uses powdered concrete to push the blocks up, which is genius, as no system to put the glass up is really needed, as it's just a quadruple piston extender going down and a quadruple piston extender going up. Then it hit me. What if I can use that in my spruce tree farm? The bottleneck of my previous design is the sequence of putting the powdered snow back into place. This design is as simple as it goes, and it's the fastest. Funnily enough, my previous design for the snow spruce tree farm had blocks connected to a double piston extender to push the logs. It was really janky, so you can see why it was scrapped. But all you need for this design is a double piston extender, which negates the complicated and dense retraction system from my old design. Now let's get on to the layout of this design. As you can see here, this is my old layout from my snow spruce tree farm. As you can see, this is quite complicated, at least in this bit here, because what this design has to do is push this up, power this piston here, which the fact I was able to do this in such a small layout is quite marvelous. As you can see here, just do that and then it dispenses that, which requires observers here. Now after that, it has to redispense this, unpower this, push this, and then activate this, unpower this, and push it back in. Now, as you can see, that's a very complicated process. And as you can see here, this is actually very compact. I actually don't even know how I did this beforehand. This was I did this during school, like during my break time. So this was actually a very impressive feat that I was able to do. Now we need to make this faster and more compact and a lot better. So first we have to remove this entire floor here. This is just way too complicated and way too slow, even though it's a pretty fast system, all things considered. So what we need is to place down a sticky piston here and pistons here. Now all we need to do is grab some powdered concrete, push it there. Now that makes it way easier, and all we need to do is just power these two pistons. As you can see. Of course, this can be a little faster if you were to do something like this, and now as fast as you need to be. And now all we have to do is just that, and then so push that there, and now that's pretty good. Now actually, ironically enough, first do that, retract this, and then do that. It's very easy and just use timings. Now here, this itself is actually good, but the problem is that it uses 4 blocks. This design needs to have as many blocks to be able to push out, considering that I'm using TNT chambers, so I need as much room that this thing is going to give me. And actually, reducing this is actually going to be a save for this one. So what I actually have to do is reduce it. Now how do I reduce it? Well, I simply just do this. put the piston back here and actually just make it a standard double piston extender. Now it uses just 3 blocks instead of 4. Now, to make this faster, you actually have to use stuff like this to be able to get to not do something like that, and then push that there and there. Extends it really fast and retracts it pretty fast as well. And the problem is that sometimes this might break, and I really don't want to. I mean, this could work, but I am not trying it. So the extra length is just there for safety, and I'm not risking it. Now the final thing to actually do well, first of all, I need to do this so that you guys can see how far away the actual guy is, or how far away you are from the tree. So like that. Now the final thing we have to do is actually change this up. Now of course this will be pulsed like this, and then that, which will connect that. So you have to move that away. But instead we change the layout so it's like this, and the observer is here, and a cobblestone wall there. All we need now is just a block, a sticky piston, grabbing that. Of course we need another sticky piston to grab the bottom block. And it's very simple, all you have to do is just have a block like that. So similar to that, and then, and to prove that right there, as you can see here, that slows it down. Of course, you're gonna have a different system here to, make sure that this doesn't extend, but that's essentially how it works. So this is essentially the new layout that I went for, because this is way simple. Oh yeah, and I'll remove this, so that this is way simpler. Now we have this entire area for gathering spruce saplings. And the final thing is that I changed this system of dispensing. So originally I pretty sure I use a system like, and then I have this. Now this worked, but for some reason in some scenarios it just doesn't. Like, it kind of works, but for some reason it just didn't want to. At least for my design. So it kind of does work in some scenarios, but for this one it didn't, and I wanted to make sure that it is exactly 5 times a second. So what I did was I just used a comparator clock. Now comparator clock is really good because it has a property in which you'll see that when a repeater is too close to it, it is pulsed continuously. That's a really good system. Now on the for the one with the observer, well, yes, longer durations. As you see, let's see. Sometimes not pulses. Sometimes it lowers the pulse. Even in this scenario, it pulses continuously, but doesn't have that same scenario. So that is the reason why I decided to use comparator clock rather than that system, because this actually does work with a 5 clock, and you can hear it here. That's pretty fast. So yeah, that's the reason. So I just changed that. So this is essentially the layout. Doing that, pushing that, let that go. Well, this one also turning on. Now let's move on to the blast chamber. For the blast chamber for this design, it needs to be big to compensate for the big trees. That's a given going to be. Now when it comes to properly putting the logs into the chambers, having 4 logs in the chamber, trying to follow 4 lines of logs is going to be difficult. So splitting it up to 2 chambers, lining 2 logs is a little bit more easier to manage. Originally, I decided to see if a Java spruce tree TNT chamber would work, but I learned that it would lead to too much loss. First, if you don't know, my fungus tree farm has a chamber to store all of the trees for one explosion. This solves 2 problems. First, it reduces the TNT usage, and it makes the farm overall more TNT efficient, meaning you don't need as much TNT to run the farm the same amount of time. Second, it solves the weird quirk in Bedrock. At the time of me recording this video, there is 0 ticking in Bedrock. The ability to break high blast resistant blocks via TNT by exploding them at the same time you push them using pistons. Essentially speaking, when a block is pushed by a piston, they have 0 blast resistance. In Java, it results in high TNT chambers as a lot of farms produce more items per explosion if used properly. But in Bedrock, where yes, the same thing applies, it does not drop items. It is basically sent to the Shadow Realm and thus loses items. When I was testing the TNT chambers from Java, it resulted in so many quote-unquote 0 tick pushes that it just negated all of the advantages and as well just destroyed the efficiency of the farm. So I have to cycle the farm every 10 trees to be able to compensate for the TNT blasts. And the reason why it's 10 trees as opposed to my fungus tree farm, which had 20 trees or I suppose more accurately 18 trees per explosion, is mainly because of the fact that, you know, it's a 2x2 spruce tree, meaning that there's 2 logs coming in. So 20 columns, there's 2, and it's a 2x2, so only 10 columns of trees can be stored at once before imploding. But it can lead to problems if the TNT is not precise and leaves a lot of spruce logs in the chamber, but it can be mitigated with a high precision TNT chamber. Now, I have to make a confession about there was a mistake I made in my fungus tree farm. Well, yes, honey does slow down TNT and negates most of its momentum. It doesn't. Its position is still slightly random, as you can see here. So yes, while it does stop it, but it does not fully stop its Y movement. It is slightly random, going up, down, a little bit more than that. So it is not fully precise. In my original fungus tree farm, I had a lot of wiggle room, but for this one, it needs to be more precise, considering I have on average 25 blocks of logs going up to explode, and I have about 3 to 5 TNT. But there is a weird solution. Blocks when in the way of the TNT spot move the TNT up by 1. This negates the TNT's upward momentum completely. Essentially, it just teleports it above the block. And when you're mined with glass, fully gives you a precise TNT chamber that will always give you the same exact results, and the only way to change it is the timing on when you dispense the dispenser and how long you keep it there. And it's so precise that when the chamber is fully loaded with spruce tree logs, it leaves at most 1 to 2 logs left, and usually clears out the whole thing with 100% efficiency when you time the TNT properly. This maximizes TNT efficiency. With the wiring of the system done, using comparators reading the chest for timing the TNT by using a Hopper clock, it is actually just about the speed that you want for the system. On a quick note, when wiring the system, it needs to have a custom comparator clock or a custom redstone length. You can't just input any signal and expect to get the same result. You need to have a very specific input to be able to make it work properly. And finally, the materials of the chamber. Sadly, it cannot be obsidian and ancient debris. That would be ridiculously expensive and not worth it. But I learned it does not have to be blast proof, just blast resistant. That is because in the smaller scale of my fungus tree farm, it was small enough to where is that it was justifiably be able to be used. But here in you can justify using it since it's a smaller area. When it comes to these two massive chambers, you can't just use obsidian. But so after many blocks, I found that a gap of 4 blocks between the TNT and the block will make it fully blast proof of the TNT. That block is endstone and is fully blast proof when on that distance, as you can see here. This makes it much cheaper and easier to work with when making this farm. All you need is the obsidian on the corners here, so the logs don't get pushed outside the chamber or break the chamber walls. Now, for getting the logs into the chamber, we need an independent way to get them into a square. What I mean is that we cannot have a full-on redstone line surrounding the chamber, unlike like in my fungus tree farm. That is just way too much redstone and makes it way more lag. So I have to be able to put them when they detect a spruce tree moving or logs moving. Sticky pistons and observers are the most likely candidate, but if observers were inside the chamber walls, they would get destroyed. So I had to use endstone walls to detect if a log is connected, which in turn the observer reads and gives a signal, which is quite intuitive, but it comes to the cost of being a little bit slower. So using standard double piston extenders will be ineffective, or suppose too fast. So using a custom slow double piston extender here gives the chamber pistons enough time to push the logs in place reliably. Now with the chamber, let's get on to the Shulker Loaders. I want to make this section of the video quite brief, mainly because I want to make a dedicated video for this shulker design. But to start, I wanted to make a more compact storage, mainly because with I didn't want to spam chests for the storage. As you can probably tell, I wanted to keep things relatively small. With if I needed if for 70,000 I need about 15 double chests per hour to store the amount of logs that's been produced into this farm. Now I didn't want to do that, so I had to compact it. But the problem with Bedrock, at least for me, was that there's not really a good multi-fast shulker designs for Bedrock. There are tileable hopper speed shulker fillers in Bedrock, but there isn't any actual like 2 times or 4 times. There was a 6 times Shulker Loader by a person named BXQden, I'm fairly certain. They made a very good design, but the problem is that they unlisted their video, so I won't be able to use that design, which is a bummer because that design was really good. But then I figured out something else. A person named Rocket Builder, which I'm going to put a link in the description because he's a really good guy, made this design. Now, this is a 4x 2-wide tileable Shulker Loader. Now, I'm not a big fan of 2-wides, but I actually started appreciating them, especially this design. Now, he separates the redstone clock from the shulker fillers. Now, in most designs, including BXQden's, the clock is actually internal, meaning that you have each dropper having a separate clock, like this, or both of them are attached to a singular clock, but each tileable design has its own clock like this. So so this clock is separated from this clock. But he made it so that the clock is its own separate thing, and then you have to move it here. So you have to tile it, and that's how it works. Now that's actually very clever, because with that you can actually make the system here much more simple. So I'm gonna pull this lever. This is gonna mimic a shulker being full, and it will put it here. Now that's actually very clever. And now this is supposed to be full. That's the only caveat to the design. You need a full barrel of non-stackable items. That's pretty much what you need. This is a bit expensive. This is the reason why I didn't like it, but it gets the job done. Now the problem with this design, Rocket Builder said that this design is not meant for item sorting. It's meant for shulker loading. So there's no system here in which to filter items. But I made a new design, or I modified this design to be able to item filter to item sort it. So as you can see here, this is the item sorter. So you just put items here, and it will dispense. It will put them into these droppers. And I modified it a little bit so that it's a lot more basic, I suppose. So instead of all of those, instead of all of these components, you just have one dropper here, one observer here, and I will activate this. Now if I turn this on, as you can see here, works just perfectly fine. I'll say it's a little faster, and the only caveat is that stops this dropper here, which also means that stops all the other droppers from dispensing into the shulker, but that's a fine caveat considering the scope of this design. Oh yeah, that's supposed to be in subtract mode. Now there is a bit of loss, I think, from what I can tell. I don't know if his design had any loss, but mine has a bit, but it's minimal at most. So yeah, that's about it. Time for the next section. With all the yapping, what have we accomplished with this farm? Well, with all things said and done, with the TNT chambers and the optimized layout, we have a farm that produces 68,800 logs an hour. And for those who are more visual learners as to how much that 68,800 logs is, that's nearly 40 shulker boxes of logs you'll get from this farm per hour. Now that's impressive. Now I have to make a confession on how I found out those rates. Originally, on my Snow Spruce Tree farm, I did not have Canopy. Now, Canopy is a really good mod that I use to, it's essentially carpet for Bedrock, and this mod helps me find out my rates and optimizing this farm a lot better. Because of how fast this farm is, slowing it down actually helps out a lot better. But during my Snow Spruce Tree farm, I did not have this, so I had to manually find everything myself. So just note that my Snow Spruce Tree farm is around the same speed as this Gravity Tree farm, so they have similar rates. And that's right, this farm actually has similar rates to my Snow Spruce Tree farm, which has wither cages, even though this TNT chambers stops it periodically. That's how fast this design is. Now if you were to actually put a wither cage on this design instead of my TNT chambers, well, you can get rates up to 85,000 logs an hour, or more than that. It's around there. That's the limit of this design, but I do not want to use wither cages. Not really anymore. The next thing you have to worry about, and the mistake I made on my Snow Spruce Tree farm, or I suppose the correction I need to make on that portion, is the two double piston extenders, these 2x2. Reason why we have dirt here is so that nothing can interfere with these observers, but we don't have anything here. And then sometimes on a rare occasion, a leaf here spawns here and it decays right when an observer is here. So when it decays, it sends a observer pulse, which makes the sticky piston go like this, and therefore breaks the system. So what you have to do is put these sticky pistons on the side here for these two blocks specifically. Just for these ones, the rest can be filled with dirt, and this will stop the pistons from breaking here. Now with this TNT chamber, we have to optimize this. And what I mean by that is that not every tree is 26 blocks and up. Most trees stop around here-ish. That means there's not a lot of blocks for the fifth TNT to explode, which reduces TNT efficiency. This needs to change, but we can mitigate that by not dispensing TNT here when there's not a sufficient amount of logs here. And how we can do that is locking this part here and only unlocking it when there's actual logs in the system on that height. And how we do that is simply putting a observer here, block here, repeater, two blocks out, redstone dust here, and then there, redstone block here, 11 blocks of glass, 1 redstone block, piston here, here, and then up to here. Up to that way, and then up to redstone dust here. And once that, and if it senses there's logs there, just break that, and it will unlock it. And to put it back, you just have to have this in here, a repeater on this part here, so that when it activates, it will send a pulse up to here, and then an observer here, and 2 redstone dust, and that is your locking system for this dispenser here. The fourth one you could, but it's just so common that it doesn't really matter that much. It's just rare to not have a 4-block system there, so it's just fine there. Same thing on this side, just have a system here. Now you're wondering how much TNT efficiency you get from that small optimization, and actually you get, so when you use that system instead of not implementing that, you save around, it goes from 850 TNT used per hour down to 720 TNT used per hour, which means that you save around 2 stacks of TNT per hour if you were to use this system here. That is pretty good. It changes the TNT efficiency from 81 blocks per TNT to 95 blocks per TNT when using this design. So it's a lot more efficient. The last thing I want to talk about is the bone blocks. The bone meal system. Before, I used to have a chest here, and it will only last you about an hour to an hour and a half, which is more or less fine, mainly because you don't need to run this farm for more than an hour. But there is one small caveat. It's kind of a pain to always fulfill it every time you want to use it, so having one system where you can just refill it and it will last you for a while is actually a lot better. This system here with full of bone blocks, including the hoppers, you can save. It will last you about 7 hours of runtime, just more than enough for most people. This farm uses around 3,700 bone meal an hour, so it is a requirement to have a lot of bone meal here. Just having a bone block and then having crafters here turn it back into bone meal and using the bone blocks. That's about it for this showcase. Huge thanks for Ben the Human for the original concept for this layout, and thanks for Rocket Builder for the sword system. There will be a tutorial in the near future for this entire system. Yes, there will be a tutorial for this. I'll make a tutorial. It's going to be like 3 hours. I'm not feeling like it, but it will happen in the near future, and there'll be more down in the link in the description. Okay, have a good day, guys, and see you guys in the next video. Bye.